we're tracking a major development out of Russia. Emergency officials there say a business jet has crashed north of Moscow, killing everyone on board. Mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin is reportedly on the passenger list. Prigozhin is the founder of the Wagner military group. He's played a prominent role in Russia's war on Ukraine. The CBC's Chris Brown is tracking all of this for us from our London bureau. So, Chris, what do we know about this crash?
Well, first of all, Andrew, suggesting or calling Yevgeny Prigozhin a mercenary leader doesn't really quite cut to the evil that is in this person. He's a truly awful human being. He was responsible for thousands upon thousands of murders, not just in Ukraine, but Syria and in Africa. He applauded his soldiers who castrated Ukrainian prisoners of war and even had his own deserters from Wagner executed with a sledgehammer to the head. So all around those places, there will be some glee if, in fact, he is dead, if, in fact, these reports that we're hearing are true. The evidence comes from this video in part. It's a disturbing video for some people showing an Embraer business jet falling out of the sky just north of Moscow, spiraling down, taking quite some time to hit the ground and then exploding in a ball of flames. Now, Prigozhin was listed as one of the passengers who apparently was on board that plane. Of course, we've not seen evidence. I'm not sure what that evidence would be aside from a body that was clearly identifiable, but there are stronger hints coming through of late. Gray Zone, which is a Russian telegram channel that was very close to Wagner, is now saying that Prigozhin was dead, killed, according to one post, by traitors of Russia. If, of course, he was on that plane and that plane was targeted and he was assassinated, well, it really won't be that much of a surprise. It really seemed like Prigozhin was a man living on borrowed time, Andrew, ever since that attempted mutiny back in June.
And let's talk a little bit more about that, because many observers were surprised that Vladimir Putin seemed to cut a deal with Prigozhin after that mutiny.
So why did Vladimir Putin do that? It's really unclear at this point. There's still so much about that June event that is murky and begs a lot of speculation. Perhaps Putin felt that Wagner was too important to Russia's military, too important to Russia, and that Prigozhin was too important to Wagner in order for him to simply treat him the way he's treated so many other rivals in the past, by simply murdering them outright. Instead, Prigozhin seemed to have this deal where he brokered it with Lukashenko of Belarus, where he could move around Russia, fly into his apartment in St. Petersburg, go to Belarus. He was down in Africa. We just saw a video of him there yesterday, talking about the actions he was going to do there. So Wagner was very, very important. It helped the Kremlin project a Russian presence all around the world. So one of the many big questions is now what will happen to that? What will all those soldiers, the tens of thousands of soldiers and prisoners who were conscripted, how will they respond? We're already seeing more posts on some of these Telegram channels of anger. A couple of them we've read have said, look, we're going to have another march on Moscow. Whether that'll happen, I'm a bit skeptical, but it's one of the things, Andrew, that we'll have to look for, just how much chaos, if any, his death causes.
Chris, thank you. That is the CBC's Chris Brown live in London. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly commented earlier today on reports that Prigozhin was on the passenger list of the plane. She's in Charlottetown for the Liberal Summer Cabinet Retreat.
So I was just informed of these reports, and therefore we'll make sure to follow up, and we're assessing the situation. I'll have the chance to talk with our ambassador to Russia in the coming hours.
Is it credible that it was an error, that it was a mistake?
As I said, I will be able to have access to more information soon, and I will be also connecting with our ambassador to Russia, and that's the reason why it's important to have an ambassador in Russia to be able to have eyes and ears on the ground.
In the U.S., the State Department has confirmed it is following reports on the crash, adding, quote, no one should be surprised, end quote, if it's confirmed that Prigozhin was on board the plane. While President Joe Biden has been briefed on the crash, this is his reaction, which he shared with reporters just moments ago.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you believe?
There's not much that happens when Russia is not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer. I've been working out for the last hour and a half.
Will you watch the debates later?
I'm going to try to see get as much as I can. Yes.
What's your expectation for the GOP?
I have not. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everybody.
So that was Joe Biden reacting to the news. For more on this breaking news and the significance of Prigozhin's possible death, I'm joined by Brian Taylor. He is a professor of political science at Syracuse University and author of The Code of Putinism, and we reached him live in Syracuse, New York. Brian, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
So the consensus seems to be that this is not shocking, but and perhaps not even surprising. We heard from the U.S. president there. We've heard from the State Department saying no one should be surprised. So if the news is confirmed, what's your read on it?
I agree with those comments by President Biden and others that this is not really surprising news. So it's a breaking news story that many of us expected ever since the failed mutiny back in June, a couple months ago, exactly 2 months ago, in fact, which may be some indication of why it happened today. But Putin is known for bearing grudges and thinking that traitors are his worst possible enemies. And he labeled this act as traitorous when the mutiny happened two months ago. So many people expected payback to come at some point, and it looks like it came today.
I was going to just ask you about that Putin has referred to this as treason. Do you think that this was an attack ordered by Putin, by the Kremlin?
I would have to say yes if this story proves to be true. It's hard for me to imagine anyone else having the guts to take a decision to go after Prigozhin without Putin's blessing. Having said that, the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff were staunch enemies of Prigozhin. They had feuded for months and months. So I don't think they would have been at all unhappy to carry out such an order if it did come from Putin, and they will probably seek to benefit from Prigozhin's disappearance if that's what happens. But I think you have to look to the Kremlin for such a decision, given the way Russian politics works.
Now, the Wagner Group has been active in Africa in recent months as Russia has been trying to gain a foothold there. How do you think this could impact Russia's attempted growing influence in that region?
Well, there are reports coming out, and Chris Brown alluded to this, that Prigozhin himself was recently in Africa, and it seemed like he was trying to shore up Wagner's position in countries like Central African Republic and Libya and Mali. But we also saw some moves by Russian military intelligence to try and supplant or take over Wagner operations there. So I suspect they will try and take control of those operations there and bring them more tightly under Russian military control, even if they keep an arm's length and put some quasi-private structure in between it. I think we can say the threads will lead back to Moscow, and they will want to hold on to those assets if possible.
And what about Ukraine? What kind of implications could this have on the war in Ukraine?
Well, of course, Wagner has not been fighting there for the past 2 months because of the mutiny. But I think it's fair to say, and Chris Brown is right, that this is a figure who was odious in many respects. But I think it's fair to say that in some respects, Wagner was quite effective in its fighting, especially around the Bakhmut area in Ukraine. And although they took very high casualties, they were able to eventually seize that city as Prigozhin had promised Putin. And the regular military had not shown itself able to go on the offensive in the way that Prigozhin did. I'm not saying it was a huge success, but he proved himself, and Wagner proved itself in some ways more battle ready than the rest of the Russian military. So I think the Russian armed forces will try and replace that with other units, going forward. But although the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff, Shoigu and Gerasimov, have been very effective political infighters, they have been very ineffective as war leaders. So I think from the Russian state point of view, the loss of the Wagner assets, which we trace back to June, does hurt their position in Ukraine going forward.
Hurts their position. What about Putin's position? What about Putin's hold on power? What does this signal anything around that?
Well, I think it'll be a signal to members of the Russian elite that this is the consequence of crossing Putin. I think a lot of people at the time, including among the Russian elite, thought allowing this mutiny to go as long as it did and then not punishing those who were behind it made Putin look weak. So this will be a signal to those people that Putin is still very much in charge. It'll also be a signal, quite frankly, that any deal you cut with Putin is conditional because he can revoke the terms of that deal when he sees fit and when it's to his advantage.
And what about the Wagner Group itself? Do you think that this could mark the very end of this group, or do you see someone else taking the helm? And then what happens to those who were recruited into this group?
I think the Wagner brand will die today with apparently the death of Yevgeny Prigozhin. They may try and move those assets elsewhere, take them under control under a different name, or even absorb them into the regular Russian military. But given the mutiny, I don't think Putin will want that label to float out there. So Wagner had a 9-year run, but it was built for Putin's purposes, and it will go down because that's to Putin's advantage sitting in 2023.
Brian, again, thank you very much.
Happy to do it, Andrew. Thank you.
That was Professor of Political Science at Syracuse University, Brian Taylor in Syracuse, New York.